We had one heck of a shindig last night here, and just want to thank everybody that was here and was part of that. It was a great time. Um, just thank you, everybody. I want to thank Pastor Jeff for covering the ring for me last week when I was down in Florida, and Pastor Danny for covering Wednesday night. Didn't get a chance to listen to it. Was it any good? Sure, it was good. I just hope I don't teach over the same thing you taught. We are in the book of Acts, chapter 25, as we continue that verse-by-verse study. The title of today's message, God's Protective Hand. And I just think, as you know, what's going on in the world today, as we read the headlines and watch the news, this is kind of a perfect chapter to be in. It's really a history lesson because we're talking about Paul and his imprisonment, and you know, you kind of think, well, what's real spiritual about that? But hopefully we'll be able to dig a little deeper and get that spiritual flavor of this chapter and the application as we see Paul being an example and how we could apply that to our lives in lives that are in, well, I mean, there's turmoil out there. Outside of these four walls, there's turmoil. You know, people are nervous about different things going on in the world, the stock market, the virus, war in the Middle East, you know, the list goes on and on. The political scene here in the United States, all these different things that are happening. And so there's all kinds of turmoil, but you know what? We as Christians, we get to come here into the sanctuary of the Lord. You know, what's that verse? Better to be one day in your house than 1,000 elsewhere. And how true that is. We could come in here and it's like, whew, you know, let's get refueled, recharged, and let's, you know, just rededicate ourselves to the Lord. And that's kind of what's happening here with Paul. Paul, as you know, when we've been going over the last few chapters, for 2 years he's been in prison under the authority of Rome. He's in prison there at Caesarea. Governor Felix was the one that imprisoned him, and you know, Governor Felix wasn't the most upright of guys, trying to just keep him installed, not making the decision on what to do with Paul. Really looking for that handout, looking for that bribe, hoping that Paul would pay him to release him. That never happened. Paul wasn't gonna do that. He wasn't gonna commit that he was guilty of anything, so he was gonna fight it. Paul was. Felix knew that Paul was innocent, and yet he still operated dishonestly. A man of no integrity, kind of a thing. He was greedy. He was evil, and the only reason, you know, he was operating the way he was looking for political favors from the Jews, trying to keep the Jews happy, trying to keep civil obedience, you know, in order. Didn't want the word to get back to the emperor or anything that he was doing a lousy job. But then finally, after 2 years, he's gone, and a new governor comes on, Festus. Yeah, every time I think of Festus, I think of the old Gunsmoke movie. Remember the old Gunsmoke, Festus? So Festus is there, and he's now in control. He's the one in power. But he's going to talk to Paul. He's going to find out Paul's story. And he, too, knows that the man is not guilty. But what is he going to do? Is he going to do anything about it? No, not really. Because it's the same story. It's the same political situation, the Roman government and the courts. So he's not going to do much either for Paul. So Paul, 2 years, is kind of wasting away there in prison. Paul knows that, man, I need to be out there. I need to be out there sharing the gospel with people because, you know, the world is hurting. The world was hurting then, and the world is hurting today. You know, we need to be out there busy about the Lord's work, you know, sharing the gospel, sharing our faith, giving people hope, because we all have hope. No matter who we are here in this room this morning, it's a sanctuary, it's a safe place. But we bring into it the stuff that is bothering us, right? The things that are going on in our lives. And it's this place that we come to that we kind of throw it up to the Lord and ask the Lord to deal with it for us. And so we have that hope that the Lord is here, the Lord is with us, the Lord knows our situations no matter what it may be, and the Lord will help us to get through it. And so we have something that nobody else does that's not in this room, that's not coming to the Lord's sanctuary. And so Paul is in that prison, and let's see what's going on. Let's see if he's struggling. Let's see what kind of attitude Paul has. So look at chapter 25. Pick it up there in verse 1. Now when Festus had come to the province, after 3 days, he went up from Caesarea to Jerusalem. And so he's the new governor. He's on scene. Caesarea, Jeff, did you pull up those slides? Just a reminder so we know where everything's at. Jerusalem down at the bottom of our map, Caesarea up on the coast to the northwest there. So there at Caesarea, because that was like the Roman province, that was the headquarters for this area, okay? And that's where the palace was. So he's now the new governor, Festus is. And so he wants to make sure everything is peaceful. And so after 3 days, he decides he's going to go down to Jerusalem to make sure that, he's going to check on things. But he's also going to, introduce himself to the Jews, the Jewish council, the Sanhedrin, and those guys, because it's the right thing to do as a political politician, making his rounds and greeting everybody and letting them know who he is and, let them know what his story is. So 3 days, and he finally goes down to Jerusalem. Verse 2, then the high priest and the chief men of the Jews informed him against Paul, and they petitioned him, asking a favor against him that he would summon him to Jerusalem while they lay in ambush along the road to kill him. It's been 2 years. Paul is in prison up in Caesarea. The Jews have returned to Jerusalem. 2 years have gone by. There's a new governor comes in. And the day that the governor comes into town, the Jewish leadership has conversation with the governor and says, hey, you got a prisoner back there, Paul. And, he really needs to go to trial. And so we're asking is that, hey, bring him back here. Change the venue. Don't let him go to court or judge him up in Caesarea. Bring him back down here so that we could have a part of that. But we see that there's an underlying motive here, and that underlying motive is that we may lay in wait to ambush him and kill Paul. See, they didn't want Paul to go to trial because, well, they probably figured if he goes to trial, they're going to find him what? Not guilty. So we can't do that, so we need to just kill him, get rid of him, right? 2 years this has been going on, festering in their hearts, hatred. Hatred against Paul, hatred against Christianity, and so they want to kill him. I don't believe they say this to Festus. They just say, hey, let's change the venue. Let's bring him back here. We're the ones who charged him, so why don't we bring him back here for trial, and we'll take care of it down here. And so they're being deceiving even to the governor. But notice what happened. Remember when this happened in the last chapters? Who was the Jews that came against Paul? Was it the religious leaders there in Jerusalem? Who was it? What? The Jews from Asia had come down and talked to the Jews in Israel. Now we don't see the Jews from Asia. What's happened is the Jews in Jerusalem now, the council, the leadership has picked up the ball and is now running with it. That hatred that is overflowed is now in their hearts. The religious leaders have hatred. How dangerous that could be when a religious leader or a religious group has hatred in their hearts. We see religious groups in our world today that have hatred in their heart against other people, right? And that should be a red flag to us anytime there's a religious group or leadership that has hatred in their hearts for other people. So we see that's what's happened here. Their hearts have turned. Their hearts are now hardened. No longer was somebody else's idea. Now it's their idea. They're pushing for it. They want to see Paul dead. And then in verse 4, but Festus answered that Paul should be kept at Caesarea and that he himself was going there shortly. And so Festus is saying, no, we're not changing. Paul is in Caesarea. He's going to stay in Caesarea, and I'm heading back there shortly, and we'll take care of business back up in Caesarea. Now, for what reason Festus made those decisions, we don't know. It doesn't tell us anything here about it. But we do know that he is the guy that's in control, and maybe it was God protecting, and I believe that's what it truly was. God's protective hand upon Paul, because had he let him go down to Jerusalem, there's a good chance that plot would have happened and they would have been able to kill Paul. If that plot didn't work and they got him to Jerusalem and they put him on trial down there, they would have came against him. The Jews would have came against him in Jerusalem. So we kind of see the Lord behind the scenes, working things out. Okay? He's working things out. He's making sure things are going to go. And he's protecting Paul. Okay? God's protective hand. And that's really the whole theme about today's message, is that God is protecting his people. Now, sometimes we say, well, wait a minute. I'm going through a difficult time. We had prayer this morning, and there's so many people that we prayed for with cancer and illness this morning. This coronavirus that's out there, And I read somebody, I think it was on Facebook, somebody put something out there, and it really disturbed me because he said something like, something to the effect of, oh, what a great God we serve. You know, X amount of people have died for the coronavirus. The hurricane or the tornadoes in Nashville killed 23 people. What a great God we serve. What do you think about that? That made me angry when somebody wrote that. Because the person that wrote that, and I don't know who it was, they have no heart for the Lord. They don't understand how the Lord operates. And they're looking at superficial, but they're looking at from worldly perspective. And sometimes we have to stop looking at worldly perspective and look at godly perspective. God sees things different than we do, okay? And so Paul there, he's there in prison. Festus is going to leave him in Caesarea. And then in verse 5, therefore he said, let those who have authority among you go down with me and accuse this man to see if there is any fault in him. And so Festus, after he kind of hears the story, I think he's already got doubts. He's got doubts that there is any faults in Paul, any faults, any real charges against him. Because it says there, what he's telling the Jews there in Jerusalem, let's go down to Caesarea. You guys are his accusers, and let's have a trial down there that you could then bring your accusations against him if there really is any accusation. So he's got some doubt about this whole thing already, saying if there's anything going on here. And so he says, bring your leadership. Bring those who make the accusations against Paul, bring them down. And why do we say down when it's up, when we look at the map? Anybody remember that? Yeah, because they're in Jerusalem on a mountain, so they got to go down the mountain, okay? And so I just want you to kind of understand the biblical term there. So they got to come down out of Jerusalem and then head out toward the coast to do that. We see here the corruption is growing in Jerusalem. The corruption is growing over time. It's been 2 years, and we see the hatred coming out. Now it's the church leadership is hating Paul and wanting to see Paul dead. And that's a dangerous thing, as I said earlier, when leadership starts to turn like that. And so they're willing to take that 75-mile trip to go ahead and try to prosecute Paul. And we see that in verse 6. And when he had remained among them more than 10 days, he went down to Caesarea, and the next day, sitting on the judgment seat, he commanded Paul to be brought. And so it happens, but he's in no hurry to get there. Festus is in no hurry. He stayed there, 10 more days, hanging out there in Jerusalem, doing his political business and whatever he ever had to do. Finally, he leaves. He goes to Caesarea, and this Jewish entourage goes there also. Jeff, you got a slide there of Caesarea? This is Caesarea Maritima. This is the one, because the Caesarea Philippi also, Caesarea named after the Caesars, so that name is very common. But this is the one we're talking about up there on the coast of the Mediterranean. On the right is the remains, how it looks from the sky. You go there and you can see that. And then so there's an artist's conception of this great city at the time. And again, this is the Roman headquarters for this part of the world, for this part of their empire. Empire or umpire? Umpire. Baseball season, umpires on my mind. But you see, look at the theater down here in the bottom corner. And then you can see it over there. And if you're looking at the artist picture there, you see the theater just over to the water more. That was the palace, okay, where the governors stayed. And then just north of that, you see what's it called, the Hyperdome or something like that it's called. And what they did is they had the chariot races and things like that. 10,000 people could sit in there and watch chariot races. Kind of like, it's Bristol, baby. That's what they had there. And so I just think it's an amazing thing to see this, and then to think back, this is a bustling city, okay? Lots of things, a lot of commerce, lots of things happening there, sporting events. And what's going to happen is they're going to come here and they're going to put Paul on trial here. Paul first is going to get with Festus. He's going to have a conversation. And then where is this trial going to be? Where is this? It's not even a trial. It's more of a hearing. Because he's not on trial. It's just a hearing to bring out the facts. But is it possible that theater, next picture, is it possible? Look at this scene. Imagine being in that stadium, looking out onto the Mediterranean Sea, how beautiful that is. It reminds me of a lot of stadiums in our United States today. Pittsburgh has one on the water like that. San Francisco has it on the water. People flock to these places. And so this could be the place where Paul is going to be as he's spoken to. And think about this. People are going to come from all over that city to hear this story, to hear Paul's story. And what is Paul's story going to be? It's going to be the gospel, right? He's going to defend himself with his faith. And so all these people are going to get the gospel message, okay? See, Paul knows that even though he's in chains, he's been in prison for 2 years, God has promised him something. Remember, God had promised him that he would go to Rome and speak to kings. And this is what's happening here, okay? So I just want you to see that and kind of think about how it went down, okay? Because we know that God made a promise to him that he was going to use him mightily. And this is what's happening, even though he's in chains. So he could look at his circumstances from his own perspective and say, wow, this is really terrible. What can I do here? But we see God's perspective, we see a whole different story happen, okay? And so that's what I want you to remember this morning, that no matter what you're going through, as you look at it from your perspective, you see one thing, but God sees something bigger, something mightier. And so we kind of got to align ourselves to God's thinking, no matter what you're going through, okay? Let's go back to Acts, verse 7. When he had come, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood about and laid many serious complaints against Paul, which they, what? Could not prove. So anybody could come against anybody and say anything, right? But they couldn't prove anything. There's no evidence. There's no real witnesses that are going to come forward and say, yes, this is what happened. So they couldn't prove these accusations, these complaints about Paul. Verse 8, while he answered for himself, Paul now has an opportunity to speak back. While he answered for himself, neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar, have I offended in anything at all. 3 charges. That he came against what? The law of the Jews. The second charge was that he desecrated the temple. And then the third one was that he came against Caesar, Roman government, Roman law. And that was the charges against him. And he says here, he addresses all 3. No, I haven't done any of those 3 things, he says. He says, I have not offended in anything at all. I have no guilt. My conscience is clean, he says, is basically what he's saying. He's got a clean conscience. And that's something, brothers and sisters, that we should always have a clean conscience. As we live our lives and we try to set examples, is your conscience clean? Are you doing the things that the Lord wants you to do in your life? Or is there something in your life that, well, you're failing to do, or you're doing that you know the Lord doesn't want you to do? Do you have a clean conscience before the Lord? Paul does, and because he does, he knows that he could trust God to protect him. He knows that he could trust God for God's blessing because he's a child of God. He's in obedience. He's got a clean conscience on this. And so that helps build the trust. Now think about yourself for a moment. If you're doing something that you know the Lord doesn't want you to be doing, is your conscience clean? And how much can you really trust God to protect or to bless or to answer? You know, I know in my own experience, if there's something that maybe I shouldn't have done, or, you know, I just don't have that clear conscience because I maybe sinned against the Lord or committed a sin, I feel that absence of the Lord in my life. And if I feel an absence in my Lord, then, well, the trust level drops. My faith drops. And so we want to always have clear conscience. He says, I've done none of these things. My conscience is clear. I'm not guilty of anything. And so therefore, he's got a strong faith. And he's got a strong trust in the Lord, that the Lord will do these things for him. And so we need to know that so we can do the same. And so this morning, as we go through this study, and as we'll have a chance at the end when we come to that last song, if there's anybody with a conscience that's not clear, that you've got some guilt in you, that's your time to get with the Lord and just, you know, pray it up to the Lord and ask the Lord for forgiveness. And then from that point on, then you take that turn, you take that repentance, you turn from those things, and you continue to live a righteous life, okay? So Paul's got a clear conscience. He's going to trust in God. He says, there's nothing here that anybody could come against me, that they could prove it. I've got no guilt. Verse 9, but Festus, wanting to do the Jews a favor, okay, that's his motive, again, it's a political thing. He answered Paul and he said, are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and there be judged before me concerning these things? He's playing politics. He wants to play a favorite with the Jews. The Jews had asked that. He had already said no. But now he's going to give Paul the option. Paul, listen, okay, you've told me that you're not guilty, so, why don't we go back to Jerusalem, and let's hear your case there in Jerusalem. See, what Festus is trying to do here, he's trying to, get out of this thing. If he could somehow pawn this decision-making off. Because here's what's going to happen. He's either going to make the Jews mad in his decision-making, or Paul, being a Roman citizen, when word gets back that he did something maybe improper or illegal towards Paul, that's going to get back to Rome. And so he's kind of stuck, like in a pickle, we call it, where, whatever decision I make, somebody's not going to be happy about it, and there's going to be consequences to that. And so what's the best way out? Well, the best way out is if I take him, put him back to the Jews, and they handle it, or he's dead, this problem goes away. Remember we talked about, I think it was last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, we talked about sometimes we don't want to make those hard decisions, and we just want to let time go on, because sometimes time takes the decision away from us. Things just work themselves out. Kind of that's what he's trying to do here. He's trying to wiggle out of having to make a decision, but he's the leader. He's the governor. That's what he's paid for. That's his position, to make these hard decisions, but he doesn't want to do it. He knows the guy's not guilty, and yet he says, hey, why don't we just take it down there and have trial down there? So you kind of see his leadership skills are lacking for sure. Wanting to do the Jews a favor, he says. So verse 10, so Paul said, I stand at Caesar's judgment seat where I ought to be judged. I am a Roman citizen. I want to be judged by Caesar. That's where I should be. This is the right thing. To the Jews I have done no wrong, as you very well know. And so my right as a Roman citizen, I want to be judged under Roman law. That's basically his argument. Now, for the Christian, is that a good argument? Well, Paul, is this a good argument? Or some would say this is not a good argument. Some would say that, we should just kind of roll over and, the authority above us. We're supposed to respect the authority above us for sure. But we don't need to just roll over and play dead. Paul's going to argue, I'm not guilty of anything. Now, think about Paul, what he had said about life and death. He said that, to be apart from the bodies, to be with the Lord. And he looked forward to that, to being with the Lord. But he also said what? How important it is for him to stay and present the gospel to the hurting world. He had a mission to do here on this earth. And so he was like, it didn't matter to him, but he thought one was more important than the other. So he's fighting for his life here. And we too should take a stand when somebody comes against us. There's no doubt about that. We should take a stand. Some people, we're talking about the incidences happening at the churches across the United States, and locking doors and putting armed security in the churches and stuff. And there's a mixed feeling about that, about even amongst Christians. That, well, we may come, people may see that and be offended by it. Other people say it's a great thing. This way I feel safe. I believe that we have our obligation to this church, to this body, to protect it. And so we're not going to let somebody come in the back door and wreak havoc amongst us. We're going to protect it just like you would protect your family members. That's our responsibility. Paul's fighting for his life here, okay? I've done nothing wrong. I'm a Roman citizen. You bring me to Caesar, and I'll speak in front of Caesar, okay? If I am an offender, he says, or if I've committed anything deserving of death, I do not object to dying. See, that's his attitude, because he knows if he dies, he's not going to be home with the Lord. So he doesn't have no fear of death. I do not object to dying, he says. But if there is nothing in these things of which these men accuse me, no one can deliver me to them. Not even you, Mr. Festus, Governor Festus. Not even you have the power to deliver me. He says, I appeal to Caesar. I've got no fear of death. If I go there and they say I should die, well, that's fine. But no man can turn me over. No man can turn me over to the Jews. And so he uses that right as a Roman citizen. We have rights as American citizens. And we should use those rights that we have. They're God-given rights to us. And so we should, understand what our rights are. And we should, appeal to those rights. We should stand on those rights, have faith in those rights. And so now the governor says in verse 12, then Festus, when he had conferred with the council, he answered, you have appealed to Caesar you shall go. What did he do? That was his way out. He's probably real happy that Paul did that. Because now the Jews really can't come against him because he is a Roman citizen. He's appealed to Caesar. My hands are out of this. I got to wash my hands of this. He's got to go to Rome and go in front of Caesar. And so he's wiggled his way out of this, making that decision. He's going to send the case to the emperor. Now, think about this for a moment, Festus here. Festus is going to send the case up the chain of command, or going to send him to the emperor, who's a very busy man with this case. And now Festus has got to be thinking, well, I've got to do a legal brief. Everybody know what a legal brief is? Okay, a legal brief is something that an attorney would write, showing what the charges are, and to present it to a grand jury, something like that, or to the court. And so he's thinking, well, I'm going to send him to Caesar. I've got to let them know what the charges are. I can't just send him there. It would look unfavorable on me if I didn't do the job right. Whoa, wait a minute. What am I going to charge this guy with? He's not guilty of anything. Now after he's made this decision, Paul's made the decision to go to Rome. Now Festus has really got some trouble because now he's promised to send him, and he has nothing to send him with. Okay. You have appealed to Caesar you shall go. And after some days, King Agrippa and Bernice came to Caesarea to greet Festus. So what's happening here, we kind of take a little switch here, verse 13, that Herod Agrippa II this is. Herod Agrippa II, a king, okay? He's a king. He's the son of Herod Agrippa I. Herod Agrippa is the one who killed James. Remember at the beginning of the Acts? That was his father. The grandfather or granduncle, I'm not sure. I think it was the granduncle, is the one that beheaded John the Baptist. Okay, and his great-grandfather was Herod the Great, the one that tried to kill Jesus when he was a baby. Okay, so this Herod family here is a pretty rough family. So Herod comes to see Festus. He brings Bernice. Anybody know who Bernice was? His what? Okay, it was his sister, and he said a consort. Consort means basically his lover, his sister. So we see the kind of thinking this guy's got. He's, immoral kind of a person. An incestuous relationship with his sister. And also, Bernice's sister was Drusilla from last time we met together. Remember, Drusilla was the one that was having an affair. She was married and was having an affair with Felix, right? So you see all this stuff that's going on. We see ungodly people now in control of Paul's life. Is that a good statement? Are they in control of Paul's life? No, the Lord's still in control of Paul's life. But if you look at the circumstance, if Paul looks at a circumstance, Felix, Festus, Bernice, Drusilla, all these people that are coming against him, he could see that being in chains for 2 years. The Jews are coming against him. Everything's coming against him. Everything's falling apart. And we say that today, don't we? The world is falling apart. But then somebody came up with it. No, it's not falling apart. It's what? Falling together. It's coming together, right? As the Bible tells us. So again, take your eyes off the circumstance and keep your eyes focused on God, on the Lord. And so now Bernice and Agrippa, they're there. They come here now to, pay their respects to the new governor. This is the king. Now, some people say that Agrippa didn't have any really authority over Festus. Other people say that he did, but Agrippa was really the king of up north near Galilee, okay, that region up there. He had made some people mad over in Rome, and they kind of diminished his powers a little bit. And so one of the reasons they made him mad was because of his actions, the stuff that he was doing. People were seeing it. There was rumors going on about him, and so they kind of had to pull back the reins a little bit. So we don't know who had more authority, but we do know that Agrippa had a Jewish background. And Agrippa had knowledge of the Jewish traditions and the Jewish laws. So Agrippa comes into town, and I bet you Festus was thinking, wow, this is the perfect guy. Because, see, Festus didn't really know anything about the Jewish religion, the traditions, or anything. But now, a guy comes into town, a king who does. And so the wheels are turning in the governor's head, and he says, man, I could use this guy. This guy, he could help me find out what charges to come against Paul to send to Rome. Okay? So that's what's happening. So Agrippa and Bernice, and every time you see Agrippa's name, you're going to see Agrippa and Bernice together. Luke is really trying to let us understand that there's immorality going on here. There's worldly people here, sinful people here that are trying to destroy Paul. So then it says, in verse 14, when they had been there many days, Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, there is a certain man left a prisoner by Felix. I like the way he does that. You know, he's let a couple of days go by, and then if the time is right, now he says to the king, he says, hey, you know, we've got a guy in prison. You know, he's down in there, but, you know, Felix is the one that left him there. What's he doing? Passing the buck. I had nothing to do with it, but now I'm stuck with it, and so, you know, not my fault, king, you know, but we got to deal with this. That darn Felix, man, he left here and he left a mess. Okay? Verse 15, speaking about Paul, about whom the chief priest and the elders of the Jews informed me when I was in Jerusalem asking for a judgment against him. It's almost like Felix didn't even tell me. But when I went down to Jerusalem to make my rounds, the guys down there, they told me about it. And so I checked into it, and sure enough, we got this certain man, Paul, and he's in our prison. Okay? 16, to them I answered, is it not the custom of the Romans to deliver any man to destruction before the accused meets the accusers face to face and has opportunity to answer for himself concerning the charges against him? And what is Festus doing here? He's telling the king that I understand Roman law and I followed it to the T. I'm doing my job as governor, you know. I told them, the Jews down there, hey, wait a minute, you know, under Roman law, he's got a right to be accused by his accusers to meet them face to face, okay? He's kind of covering for himself a little bit here. Verse 17, therefore when they had come together, this is Paul and the accusers, when they've now come together, without any delay, the next day I sat on the judgment seat and I commanded the man to be brought in. When the accusers stood up, they brought no accusation against him of such things as I supposed, but had some question against him about their own religion and about a certain Jesus who had died, whom Paul affirmed to be alive. And so what he's telling the king is that I really don't, Paul didn't break any Roman laws. They are accusing him of breaking some Jewish tradition and some Jewish laws. And talking about this certain man, Jesus, he hasn't heard about Jesus. He doesn't know who Jesus is, a certain man, Jesus, who apparently died, but Paul says he came back to life. Basically, he says, I have no idea. I don't know what to do about this. Right? He just doesn't understand the Jewish law. Verse 20, and because I was uncertain of such questions, I asked whether he was willing to go to Jerusalem and there be judged concerning these matters. But when Paul appealed to be reserved for the decision to Augustus, I commanded him to be kept till I could send him to Caesar. Okay, and this Caesar that he's going to get sent to is Caesar Nero. Okay, just for your information. And now Caesar Nero, in the beginning of his power, records kind of show that he was a pretty decent leader, decent emperor. But after about 5 or 6 years in that position, things started to go downhill, and that's when he really became an enemy of the Christianity. At this point, he's not such an enemy of Christianity. So Paul knows who the Caesar is. He knows it's Nero. He's willing to take his chance in front of Nero because he hasn't come against the Christians yet. Okay? We know Nero then burnt down the temple and came against Jerusalem, came against the Jews, right? We know all that. What else did he do? He took the Christians and did what with them? Fed them to the lions, used them as lampposts, right? All that stuff. We know all that about Nero. That hasn't happened yet in Nero's life. Paul's willing to take a chance. Verse 22. Then Agrippa said to Festus, I also would like to hear the man myself. Festus responded, tomorrow, he said, you shall hear him. Okay. So the next day, when Agrippa and Bernice, there they are again together, they're inseparable, had come with great pomp and had entered the auditorium with the commanders of the prominent men of the city, at Festus' command, Paul was brought in. And so we see that great opportunity for the gospel. We have a governor now who's already heard the gospel, but he's going to hear it again. We've got a king who's there who's going to hear it. All the prominent men of the city, the leadership of the city, all the important people are going to be there. Okay? They're gathered together, maybe in that theater, maybe in that stadium. It's a big thing. Pomp and circumstance. You know, I think of it like, you know, when you watch, I don't watch these things, but the things with the red carpets, you know, and all the stars show up at night and all that stuff that's going on, and everybody's dressed to kill, and it's kind of what's going on. This is a big thing going on there in Caesarea. Big thing where all the important people are coming out. They're going to hear this guy, Paul. What are they really probably looking for? Entertainment, something gory, you know, let's just kill him here type of thing. But so we've got all this going on. And Festus said in verse 24, King Agrippa, his opening statements. King Agrippa and all the men who are here present with us, you see this man, Paul, about whom the whole assembly of the Jews petitioned me, both at Jerusalem and here, crying out that he was not fit to live any longer. But when I found that he had committed nothing deserving of death, and that he himself had appealed to Augustus, I decided to send him. I have nothing certain to write to my Lord concerning him. Therefore I have brought him out before you, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that after the examination has taken place, I may have something to write. For it seems to me unreasonable to send a prisoner and not to specify the charges against him. I couldn't imagine arresting somebody and sending them to the court without the affidavit or charges. That would be suicide. You know, that would be career suicide. That would be something that's actually illegal to do that. And so he says, it seemed unreasonable to me to send him as a prisoner and not have charges to go along with it. Common sense. How am I going to write this brief? How am I going to write this affidavit of complaint? How am I going to, what's the probable cause I have to send him to you? And so he's now asking Agrippa, the prominent men, he's trying to get some feedback from all these people. All these people are worldly people, right? But notice who's not there. Who's not there? Who do we not mention? The Jews from Asia are missing, right? They're not even invited to this thing, okay? So again, this is not a trial. This is basically a hearing, an opening statement. What are these charges that we could come up with to present against Paul? And so, chapter 26, we're not going to get into that this morning, but Paul is going to get that opportunity to share the gospel with the governor, the king, the prominent men, the important people of the city. Okay, he's going to get to do all that. Now, I think what we said about circumstance and looking at your circumstance and your situation, Paul sees all that, but he also knows he's trusting in God. He knows what God already promised him, and he's going to weigh in on that. He's going to hold on to that dearly, that I know what the Lord has said to me, and I know what the Lord has promised me. And so I'm going to be faithful to the Lord. And he knows if he's faithful to the Lord will be faithful to him. And as we study the Bible, we go through scriptures, we know that there's a lot of false accusations against godly people. I think of Joseph. Remember Joseph back in Egypt, a man of God, false accusations against him. Daniel, the same thing, a godly man, and false accusations come against him. Here we see Paul, false accusations coming against him. We see Jesus, of course, the same situation, false accusations coming against him. But you think about, what did Jesus say in John chapter 15? He said, if the world hates you, what? You know that it hated me first, right? And so that's what's happening. The world comes against Christianity because it hates the one that we follow. And so we, as followers of Christ, we have to kind of keep that in the back of our minds. That the world hates us, hates the message we have because of the one that we follow. They hate him because of his message, okay? They hate him because of the message he brings, and so they bring, false accusations against us as they did Paul. See, they're thinking the Jews were thinking, if we could get rid of Paul, his message is gone. And if his message is gone, we could then continue to live our lives the way we want to. and we're not accountable to anybody. And so that same thinking has come through the ages. Here, 2020, it's the same thing to the non-believer, to the atheist. Get rid of the messengers, get rid of the message, and then we're not accountable to that God, if there is a God, they say. And you know, spiritual warfare happens in our lives. You guys know I just retired last Wednesday, and that was the big shindig last night they had here for me. It was a party and celebration of the new season in life. But the promise that I made was, okay, Lord, full-time ministry. And you know, I was kind of blindsided by this. Didn't even think about it. A commitment. Okay, Lord, I'm going to do full-time ministry. And you know, yesterday I got 2 or 3 emails, message from a particular person who claims to be an atheist, attacking me and my character, attacking Calvary Chapel. I only met the guy one time and had a 2-second conversation with him. But he hates God, hates Jesus so much that he's attacking the messenger. He's attacking the message. Because he doesn't want to live by the rules that God established for us to live. And so get rid of the message, and I'm not accountable to that message. But unfortunately for him, he will be accountable one day, won't he? Because we're all going to stand before our Maker. And so that happens in our lives. As we stand firm on our message, and we stand firm in our faith, the world will attack us. That's what this is all about. We're seeing Paul go through that. The Lord has given us this story so detailed that we may know that it could happen to us and that we may be ready for it. It's a warning. It's like, think about when, if we were at war and we were soldiers. Before we go to battle, we're going to have a briefing and we're going to let you know what to expect, right? We're going to train you up to expect the unexpected so that you're well trained and go out and have the victory. That's what the Lord is doing here. He's given us these stories that we may know. It's a briefing, and he's given us all this information that when we leave the sanctuary, the safety of these 4 walls, and we go out into that battlefield, we're ready, okay? That we could put on the full armor of God no matter what comes our way. We could put our trust in the promises of God that he's given to us, and that we can walk with a clear conscience as we walk in obedience the best that we can. And so we have that communion with God, and no matter what comes our way, if it's persecution, if it's trial, if it's a tribulation, if it's if it's sin knocking at our doors. But we know in all those things, it's from the devil, because the devil hates the Lord. And so the devil's out there, and he's looking to destroy all of us. And so we have to have that mindset. Have that mindset when you leave here. Something out there is looking to destroy you. And when you make a decision to follow Christ, and you want to do something for the Lord, that's when he's going to hit, because now you become a threat to him. And if you're a threat to him, he's going to try to hit you back. And that's exactly what happened yesterday. I can't believe I walked into that and then it happened. I really wasn't ready for it. But yesterday morning, Diane said, "Did you see the text message or whatever it was?" And I went, "No." And she read it to me, and I just sat there like, "What?" And then another one came in, and another one came in, all from the same guy. If the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. Accusations, persecutions will come to us. They are rooted in evil, according to Revelation 12:10. Please turn there real quick. Revelation 12:10. Revelation 12:10 reveals to us this very fact. It says, "Then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, 'Now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren, who accused them before our God day and night, he's been cast down.'" See, the accuser of our brethren there, underline those few words there. That shows us that these accusations and persecution, these things, they're rooted in evil, according to Revelation. For the accuser of our brethren, that's the devil. He's the one we're speaking about here. He's the one that is the accuser, and he will accuse us and try to just destroy us. But look what it says. He has been what? Overcame, yours says. Mine says cast down. He's been destroyed. Okay? See, when these men like Festus and Felix, Agrippa, they're just pawns. They're vehicles that the devil uses to come against us. This man that came against me yesterday, he's a pawn of the devil. He probably doesn't even know it. Coming against me for my beliefs and my faith. And so they rather, instead of submitting to God and to God's commands and his laws, eliminate it. Eliminate the message. Eliminate the messenger. Get rid of all that. Then I'm not accountable. I'm not responsible for what I do. I could do what I want to do. I could live like I want to live. But the light of God's word exposes that darkness, doesn't it? And as that darkness is exposed, they flee, and they run, and they hide. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure that our light is shining strong. You know, the darker it gets, the little light that we have shines that much brighter. Okay, our light shines brighter in the darkness. And so they're trying to snuff out our lights. They were trying to snuff out Paul's light. Let's get rid of this guy and his message, and let's be done with it, and let's move on in our lives. And so that I could have my affairs, and I could have my extramarital sex page with my sister and live like I want to do. This is what they wanted to do. They don't want to live like God wants them to live. And so they're trying to snuff it out. And this is application that we could take home with us this morning, because the devil wants to snuff us out. He wants to destroy us. There's an expectation that we should have that Satan is out there. And what does the Bible say he's out there doing? Seeking who he may destroy. So he's out there watching. Oh, you want to go into full-time ministry now instead of this part-time thing you've been doing? Let's see. I'm going to send somebody after you. And then he just watches and sees who's the one that he's going to attack next. He's like a roaring lion, the Bible says, ready to what? Devour. Okay, ready to devour. We're going to close in chapter 8 of Romans. Please go there. Romans 8:33. Who shall bring a charge against God's elect? It is God who justifies. Who is he who condemns? It is Christ who died and furthermore is also risen, who is even at the right hand of God, who also makes intercession for us. And so we see that in the word there, that God is there making intercession. His son, Jesus, is making intercession for us, who are his sons, his children, his followers. Who can condemn us? Who can bring a charge against us? This is what Paul is thinking. And this is what Paul wrote. That's his writing. So he's sitting there and he's in prison for 2 years. Everything's coming in on him and everything's going against him. And he's able to say something like that. God is the one that justifies me. He's the one that justifies my actions, he's saying. And he's the one that's making intercession on me. I've got a clear conscience. And I'm going to put my trust in the Lord. And so that's what we want to do. We want to put our trust in the Lord. And I just want to say one more thing before we close. I know it's getting late. Revelation 12:11, we were just there in Revelation 12, but we didn't go all the way to 11. But this says that. This says this in verse 11. And they overcame him. They overcame him, the devil, by the blood of the Lamb. What? Word of their testimony. And they did not love their lives to death. 3 things. The blood of the Lamb, Jesus overcame, right? And so the penalty for our sins has been taken care of. We don't have, so he can't throw that in our face anymore. He can't accuse us anymore of our sinfulness, because we're righteous in God's eyes because of the blood of the Lamb. He's delivered us from the power of darkness, the Lord has. The word of their testimony, we've all got a testimony. We've all had a godly experience, and nobody could argue your testimony. That is your testimony, your God experience. Nobody could argue that point. You've got a good, strong testimony, and you could use that testimony, okay, as a defense, as a weapon if you have to. Isaiah 43:10, you are my witnesses, declares the Lord. You are my witnesses. You are the witnesses who have witnessed God's power in your life, God's power in other people's lives. And you are my witnesses. And finally, did not love their lives to death. To live is Christ and to die is gain. We as Christians should have no fear of death. Paul has no fear of death. If I've got to go to Nero and die in Rome, so be it. I'm willing to go there. He had no fear. We should have no fear of death. To be apart from this body, to be at home with the Lord. Wow, isn't that powerful? And so we could overcome. Paul has overcome. God's hand is upon him. God's hand is protecting him. Next week, he gets that opportunity to then fulfill what God had promised him, to go before kings and to present the gospel. And this, in the book of Acts, this is going to be Paul's longest. Imagine that. He's taken this opportunity for his longest, I'll call it a sermon, okay? He's going to give the gospel. He's going to give a detailed gospel message to the king. Let's pray. Father, we thank you so much for this message this morning. To see the confidence that Paul had, knowing he was a follower of Jesus Christ, putting his trust and his faith into that. Lord, it's a lesson for us that no matter what our circumstance, no matter if it's a trial, maybe a tribulation, an illness, a sickness, financial problem, whatever it may be, we could trust in you, Lord, because we are children of God. And you've given us all these promises, Lord. And so we trust in the blood of the Lamb. We trust in the testimony you've given to us. And we know that we have the promise of eternity with you. And so we could bank on these three things. And Lord, we thank you for our time. We thank you for this message, Lord. Allow us to absorb it, to understand it, and to apply it, no matter what our circumstance. And I pray for my brothers and sisters here, Lord, because I know many are hurting. I pray your Spirit would just touch their hearts this morning, that you would uplift them. And as we sing praises to your name, as we close, Lord, I pray your Spirit would just touch hearts right now, Lord. Again, we thank you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.